Welcome, Democrats. Good morning. Good morning. Please stand for the pledge.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I was at a Democratic Club monthly breakfast earlier this week, and people were talking about how they believe the MAGA Republicans here have captured our flag for their perverted view of what it means to be a patriot and an American. It is up to us to take our flag back. It is up to us to take Florida back. And it is up to us to take our country back. Next slide, please. Tomorrow is Mother's Day, and at least half of our audience, I think, might be mothers. So you will get respected and honored, as you should.
Yeah, one day.
But we also, all of us probably, need to reflect and honor our mothers who are no longer with us. So that is one part of our moment of reflection today. The second part is the end of the month. Of course, it's the national holiday known as Memorial Day. That's a day for remembering and honoring the military service of those who died defending democracy. Now let's reflect. Thank you. So my name is Dennis Foley. I'm the club's vice president, and my wife Diane Foley, the president, says I have to keep doing this until I get it right. One thing I drew the line at was I'm not wearing that damn disco ring anymore. We had a great time at the party. Next slide, please. The Florida Democratic Party's Leadership Blue Conference last week in Orlando brought about 1,000 leaders and activists together. The gala dinner featured speaker was U.S. Senator John Fetterman from Pennsylvania. This quote reflects something we've been talking about and will continue to talk about, and that is recognizing the importance of what's at stake in this election coming up. This is one more reminder to you that politics is not a spectator sport. It takes all of us to claim what we need to claim back and to defend what we need to defend. We all need to do whatever we can. Oh, by the way, the hoodie he's wearing contains the Florida State Party's new logo, unveiled by Chair Nikki Freed. Merchandise will be available soon on their website. Next slide, please. Nikki Freed noted that the Florida panther, once thought to be going extinct and on the endangered list, is making a comeback and is known for its fighting spirit, and therefore she thought it was an appropriate new logo for our party at this time. She made no mention of the fact that she was a University of Florida student body government leader. Hey, leadership has its privileges too. Next slide, please. We'll lead off today with a speaker. His name is somewhere in my notes. I seem to have lost it. Does anybody know who he is? That is by far the largest banner I've ever seen anywhere. Just a minute. His name is Stanley Campbell. He is running for the U.S. Senate. He has a very impressive personal and professional resume, which we'll let him tell you all about. After he speaks, he'll answer some of your questions. Please welcome Stanley Campbell.
welcome Democrats. Wow. The largest group in the state of Florida. I'm very, very, very proud of you. I'm just going to first introduce my wife since I have so much time. Stanley Campbell. She is actually in the Biden-Harris administration. She is the first woman and woman of color to serve as the Assistant Secretary for the Department of Health and Human Services. She has 99,000 employees that report up to her. Every building, 21 unions, and is the only person in U.S. history to start her first day with $5.2 trillion. Microsoft and Google at the same time. And then to go from there, she winds up running, moving children out of cages. Remember when we first started? And those other things that I'm not going to give her that much of my time, but I'm going to let her say a couple of things and then I'll get back.
Well, good morning, good morning. First of all, leadership matters.
Yes, it does.
For me to be the first woman and woman of color to serve in this role was because of the Biden-Harris administration. Leadership matters, critically important. I am honored to serve. I did my career in private industry. I was sharing with some individuals here. If you ever heard of Medicare.gov, a portal built by my team and organization years ago. Large part of the Affordable Care Act was built by my team and organization as well. So I am embedded in the healthcare system of our country and the importance of our healthcare system. I wanted to share this quote with you because I think it describes my husband extremely well. It's from John F. Kennedy, and you know, I try to tell people there's places that you know in your life you were when certain things happened. When John F. Kennedy was assassinated, I was a first grader. And I remember being in class watching my teachers crying. And I thought, this is very odd. I remember the administrators all crying. And I remember going home and my parents were crying. And I thought, why are all these adults crying? Because they understood that our country was at a pivotal place and that democracy and someone who represented democracy for all of us mattered and had been assassinated. So this quote from John F. Kennedy says, "A rising tide lifts all boats." Because it's really what the Democratic Party represents, but it's also more importantly, this is what my husband represents. He is about a man for all people. He's about someone who cares about everyone, and that as the tide lifts, it is about lifting all of us, not for one part of our population. It is about how do we lift and make the world better, but how do we do it for Florida? We're in need. We're in need of someone who has not just the brain power because he's degreed in physics and math, but someone who understands our military, being a Navy pilot, someone who can go up toe for toe with the Rick Scott. As Rick Scott defrauded Medicare, my husband will stand here and tell you that his technology actually stops Medicare fraud every single day in the millions upon millions of dollars. That is a direct correlation to why. I'll pass it to you. We've had the luxury of being married 35 years. And in most situations, that would be like, wow, that's amazing. But in this group, I have a feeling So I am honored to be in the club of those who found their soulmate, learned what it meant to love each other. When he proposed to me, he said, baby, I will love you forever. I will put you first in my heart, and I will take you on an adventure of a lifetime. Now, running for the Senate, I don't think that was on the agenda 35 years ago, but I can tell you that every place we've gone, God continues to give us the confirmation, the affirmation that we're moving in the right direction. Something happens that just keeps telling us we're moving in the right direction for our country and for the state of Florida. So I want to introduce my husband, Stanley Campbell, the love of my life.
So now you know why I let her talk. that was pretty good. So just a little bit about myself, because I know since y'all don't have an airport on this magnificent place you live in, I couldn't have flown in here before. But I'm from Miami, Florida. Last name, thank you. All right. What are y'all doing up here? You left the beach. So I'm from Miami, Florida. And last night somebody introduced me and said, yeah, he's from the hood. And I just want to be clear. I'm from Miami, Florida, 4 blocks away from the projects. So the projects is the hood. We were in the upscale side of that part. But starting there, 2-parent family. My father married my mother when she had 2 children already and was pregnant with me. And we wound up having 5 of us. And I never heard the word step in referring to my brothers or myself or any of that. So I can tell you I was raised by 2 very strong parents. I went to Archvilla Elementary School, which was a neighborhood. You walked to school. I then went to the first class in the middle school at Charles Drew. And then after 1 year, that's when we had forced busing. So I was actually bused. You get into the lottery, and I was bused to Miami Beach. So now you take the poorest kids in the state of Florida, from Liberty City, and you bus them to the richest kids in the state of Florida on Miami Beach. So what could go wrong with that? But I can tell you, nothing went wrong. We just had our 50th anniversary last year for the class of 73. And I have now, because I went there in the 8th grade, 55-year relationship, because the junior high school and the high school was a Jewish school. So when we look at the issues associated with Gaza, and we look at the war fighting, and we'll get into that a little bit, but I understand the perspective. I understand the perspective from the eyes and ears of the Jewish community. But I'm also a war fighter. When I left Miami Beach, I went on to college at Florida A&M University. And so I'm assuming I'm the only 2 of us as rattlers in the house, but I can tell you, we had a great time at Florida A&M studying physics and mathematics. You guys read very well. I've talked to a few of you, so you know that I worked on the data reduction and error analysis package for the Voyager 2. What you don't know is I had not taken the 3rd level of calculus, which is what that was based on. So I actually had to teach myself Fourier series transformation, which is differential equation. So for the complex math people that I talked to earlier in the other room, that was a little bit of a treat. But leaving Florida A&M, I went on to work as a geophysicist for Amoco Production for a very short time, and then I joined the United States Navy in Louisiana. And then what do? They sent me right back to Pensacola, Florida. So going through flight school was great, but I can tell you the mission work that I did in the Navy, I was a pilot on the Navy for the U.S. Defense Department's #1 flying asset. That's a tactical mission. So back then, that's an airplane that stays airborne 24 hours a day, meaning you have to get relieved or you can't land. And if you don't get relieved, if that plane has a problem, then they'll launch an alert out of Bermuda. But the issue there is we actually were the only survivable asset that could talk to submarines. Now, we talk to everybody, but the key is that we have very low frequency capabilities and we can talk to submarines while they were subsurface without them surfacing or setting up an antenna. So because of their nuclear warfare power, you basically had to negotiate with them as they are a separate country. Because if you just go to the firepower in the world below France, one of our nuclear subs ranks right below France. They are very powerful assets. And that's important because we're pretty much at war. We have 2 major conflicts and maybe 4 serious conflicts that are going on right now. I worked after I got out of the military, I worked in the defense and intelligence space. I worked at the National Security Agency, and I worked at a few others that 3 letters that are still classified. But that being the case, I wound up developing 14 patents in artificial intelligence and neural computing. Why is that important? Because we know that the world that we live in today will be very different in 5 years. So in 5 years, when you leave here, the cart is going to come to you. You're not going to walk to the cart. Your car can already do that, but it's going to be able to do that in a licensed environment in 5 years. In 5 years, you will no longer need software developers. Just think of that now. We pushed all of our kids in the STEM programs because that's going to be important and all the rest. And in 5 years, the computer will be able to generate code better than them as individuals. So we have in front of us a changing world, and it will change drastically. If we look at, and most of you guys would be familiar, most of us would be familiar, we've seen transformational technology. We know the movement from the bicycle to a car, or from the bicycle to an airplane. And we know from 1914 till today what that looks like. You go from that little airplane in the museum to a 787. That's a lot of technology. But think of going from the bicycle to living on Mars. That's how transformational AI is. So it will affect every single thing in every place, and we do not have one person in the United States Senate or the House of Representatives that can actually even ask the formidable question beyond the soundbite. So that's one of the things that I think differentiates me with all of the competitors, and in fact with all of those who are in the House and the Senate. But that's not really what got me to run. I think that we could really matriculate up and we can learn as we go, and that we're going to make a few mistakes, and that's the world that I've been used to, and that's the Florida that I was familiar with. But when I moved back here 4.5 years ago, I came back because my brother says, hey man, I need some help. We need some help in Florida. And I said, well, he said, there's some ad called MyVax or something like that. We need to get that down here. Not knowing that I invented MyVax. And so I said, so what's up? He says, well, in Opelika, we have a 4.5% vaccination rate. 3 miles away in Aventura, we have an 84% vaccination rate. And I'm moving. I have the largest healthcare network in the country. We message into every point-of-sale pharmacy in the United States, and that's how we stop Medicare fraud. $120 million a day. So that's what we did. We actually put that system in when in the middle of COVID so that we can actually build a reporting system so when you got your shots, we could track that. And they said, I couldn't believe that because I'm working all over the country in places that are not as technically competent as Florida, because Florida, if you look at it, if you're 45 years or younger, every vaccine that you've taken in Florida is registered. So I'm thinking that can't be the case. And sure enough, the Miami Herald article that he sent me showed that and worse. So I moved down here, back here 4.5 years ago to address that issue. And we actually did everything. We basically got pharmacists, we got doctors, and we got nurses on the system, and they could actually pull their own vaccines. But after that, when our heads went up to see where else in Florida was an issue, they were right in this area, right in central Florida, but it was mostly farmers. Because those people, if they registered in, the governor would arrest them if they didn't have all of their papers. And we have migrant farmers who come from multiple states. Now we have people who are in the country for 25 to 30 years. Where are you going to send them back to? This is their home, but they live in our shadows. So we've got to do something addressing that. But for me, the governor rewarded me with saying that a registry, your system is a registry, and it is no longer legal to have a registry in the system, even though our work had been done with the National Institute of Health, NIH. So having to fight that and having to buy refrigeration because he wouldn't allow funds for that, and he gave 21% of the vaccines to Publix, and Publix actually donated to his campaign early. So I saw what was happening. And the whole basis of us coming in here, then I found out other things associated with what was happening in Florida. We have libraries that can't bring all books. Now, can you imagine that? So we have the selection of what book gets into a library. That slavery was a jobs training program. And literally, this is how we teach now. We teach suboptimally. If something happens in fact, then that should be taught as fact, because as my Jewish counterparts say, if you do not remember your history, you are doomed to repeat it. And for me, that would not be a good thing to be repeating, because I like owning 3 golf courses. and believe me, when I came here this morning, I was wondering, what in the world are you doing running for the Senate? You should be out here with these guys playing golf. But I can tell you, the reason I'm running is because when I went back home in Miami, I remember the day that we moved from an apartment to a house with grass all the way around. And though that was the hood, it was our hood, it was our house. And with 2 parents, I actually thought we were rich. I had to grow up and make some money to find out what worked. But I can tell you, we were rich with the things that would create a head that could get you to 14 patents in AI, and a heart that could get you to actually joining the United States military and flying and wanting to go to space and every place and beyond, that could get you to run for the United States Senate. These were the things that were important, that could move. Our middle son is in the Navy today. He's Navy weapons. And so when you now have this commitment to service, because my mother was a beautician, she basically wound up getting a GED maybe when I was about 16 or 17. But she, as a beautician, she organized women. And they would have these hair shows, but what they really were political operations. They would actually talk about the politics, and if you wanted to get elected locally or statewide, you had to come to her. You literally had to come to her. I was going from Burns up as far as I can remember, and I can tell you they came to the house. And they were both parties. I remember a guy, Bruce Kaplan, a Republican, who had no chance of winning because Overtown was in his district, but he made his case, and she supported him. because she had supported the first Democratic woman, first woman in the State House. She was a Miami Beach person, and they put Overtown in her district. And my mother supported her, and she actually won the election, basically making both Republicans and Democrats mad because they didn't want a woman in the House or the Senate. But those are the things that when they get born into you and bred into you, then you don't know any difference. And for me, I could not sit back and watch a Rick Scott put a plan in place to sunset Social Security. Now, just think about, if you look at over 60, and it's really about 58, but we'll say over 60, we got almost 50% of the vote for those of us who are over 60. And he's going to now sunset Social Security. There should not be a floor that we cannot go below. And that's what he offered to do. And the sunset was to rebid the budget for Social Security every 5 years. Now you're going to do that with a group of folks who can't even decide on whether they're going to fund the Ukraine or fund Israel, or can't get a bill that they wrote passed on the border, and you're going to put Social Security at that risk. The richest nation in the world that would not have a minimum for which its people could actually live. And then he also, as governor, did not move the Medicaid expansion. And now the current governor is moving 300,000 children off of those rolls. The sidebar is the assistant secretary and her folks, they kind of got a little plan. So when it really is almost funny. When he put people on an airplane, she moved about 700 Afghan refugees in Tallahassee, and instead of sending him the money, she sent the money to the federally funded health facilities. So you didn't hear him say one word about that. But for Medicare and Medicaid, when you now cut there, you limit your avenues of how you get to these people are limited. So he knows that we live in a nation that is not going to leave these people without health care. But showing up at the emergency room is not how you get health care. That's how you get sick care. The issue is when you now fund the Affordable Care Act to its fullest, and the Affordable Care Act, even as a zero out-of-pocket balance, meaning you don't have to pay, it is still a commercial insurance plan. So you get the full benefits as if you paid everything. So those become the kinds of things that happen at the federal level that we can actually address. And so when I ask people to think about who they're voting for, I say, get every single person running in this place that I'm standing right here, and ask them. And ask them in a way that forces them to answer an answer that you can trust. Who do you trust with your health care? A person who owns the largest healthcare network and stops $120 million every day in the week on average? A person whose healthcare system has worked to move women's health to the forefront. Just in 2024, January 24, you have the ability for what they call persistent monitoring. So what that means is, if you have a watch that actually can do your blood pressure, your pulse oximetry, or your pedometry, that can actually report to your phone, which reports to your doctor, and when you're now moving slower, or if you put a scale in the room, your weight is changing. There are models for hypertension, diabetes, congestive heart failure, COPD, asthma, and a number of other diseases that you can now build that. Meaning you go to your doctor, you have them write you a device, and that device can now be billable. Because now, with us losing 26 rural hospitals in the state of Florida in the next 24 months. We will lose 24 rural hospitals. These are people who are already now having to drive 20 to 60 miles one way. We will need persistent monitoring. We have a young lady who died here last year. She was the epitome of health. She was a gold medal winner in the 4x200. She handed the baton to another woman who was a gold medal winner in the 4x200. They were both pregnant about the same time. One of them died and her child died from eclampsia and preeclampsia and eclampsia because her blood pressure changed and she was at home. The other one also had preeclampsia and eclampsia, and her blood pressure changed, but it was at her doctor's office. And that doctor got her to the hospital. And by getting her to the hospital, one of them had a healthy baby, and then went on to have another child, and the other one died with her child. That is the importance of persistent monitoring. Because if I can now just write a prescription for a Samsung watch or an Apple Watch that can actually monitor my blood pressure. For us, it's pedometry along with pulse oximetry that can predict whether we're going to fall or not. Therein lies both the value of AI and the value of having the right elected people who will trust, who you can trust with your health care. Now, when we look at how you develop these laws, they become important. You will get a lot of people standing up here who can run the first page of the sound bites, and they can run down the list. We can get with property insurance. You can go to health care. You can go to medical advice and all the rest. But then when you go to the second page, on property insurance, how do we reduce our property insurance? We've got an entire state government that hasn't been able to do that. Well, when a hurricane comes our way, we have two major coasts, our east coast and our western coast. Our western coast shares border. It shares that angle of responsibility. It may hit us, or it could hit Alabama, or it could hit Mississippi, or Louisiana, or Texas, just with a slight turn in the angle. So that means we share the responsibility of hurricanes. So why can't we now share the responsibility of our recovery? Because our federal government is going to come in. They're going to come in, they're going to come in with FEMA, they're going to come in with HHS, they're going to come in with a number of agencies. But if we put that into a national critical infrastructure insurance program, then our insurance rates will drop about 29% because we're the highest insurance payers in the country. Texas would drop about 22 to 24%. California would drop about 28%, and so on and so on. The issue for us is if we have the national shared responsibility, then our individual rates will go down. So that's a part of what I'm going to propose, and I'm writing that bill now, because this is not the first bill that I've written. We wrote bills on the Comprehensive Addiction and Recovery Act, a Republican and a Democrat. And what did we do to get that on? We went to a strong conservative Republican out of Louisiana. And then we went to Nebraska to get a Democrat. We had, and the Republican is a doctor, but his doctor's office is in the black neighborhood. His wife is also a doctor. And we got people with common interests who saw the problem of addiction in our communities in the same view. we were able to write that program, move dollars into place, and that actually helps us across the entire spectrum of our healthcare system, where a child could actually have an injury playing a sport, get drugs that are too strong for them, or they on them too long, and now we get them addicted, and then we then look at it and calling them addicts. Where addiction is not a problem of self-awareness and self-insurance. It is a disease. And until we started treating addiction as a disease, we actually have problems. But when we now look at how do we implicate those laws, you have to be able to go past the soundbite. Because if you don't understand how these systems work, if we don't understand how the Defense Department works, we got two people who are chairman of the Armed Services Committee. One is from the senator from the state of Florida, Marco Rubio, and the other one is a Democrat from Virginia. Now, they're good people, but neither one of them have ever served in an environment where they understood the implications of their actions, of how they put laws in place. So what do? They will fund signals intelligence, because we've all worked for companies that build systems to pull the signals and pull the information off your phone and all the rest. But the way the terrorists did in Israel, they used human intelligence, and they wrote their plans and handed them. We don't have a way of intercepting that without humans in the loop. So if you don't fund human intelligence, because I don't sell human intelligence as Lockheed or Northrop Grumman or any of the others, then we actually don't understand the total implications. So we have to get people who are experienced in these positions. So when I was over next door, I got questions on macroeconomics. And I guarantee you I shocked and awed them to death because I actually have a patent on macroeconomics. Yeah, I do. It's called FRIAR. Now that macroeconomics, the question implicated how the world's economics is integrated. And so my patent actually deals with that. It was actually developed from the LIBOR scandal, and from there, I actually wrote that patent. And I promised them I would put that in my speech and throw my speech away, and we're going to just give you one little short implication on macroeconomics. Because we only have 3 people, 1 Republican and 2 Democrats, in the House and the Senate that would understand what we're talking about. When my patent was issued, it took one of the things on Wall Street, and it basically flipped how we do analysis and reporting on corporations on its head. Because what winds up happening is, what our patent did was challenge those things associated with assumptions. Well, physicists, we don't deal with assumptions. It either is or it isn't. And so from that vantage point, I won't go too deep into it, but what we were able to do is change how we actually look at money and monetary value and all the rest. So what does that implicate to you? What happens is, if you do that wrong, we get high interest rates. We get implications associated with fuel costs and everything else. And if we do that right, we wind up with the #1 economy in the world, or so they say. And so what winds up happening is, these are the kinds of things that we cannot trust soundbite politicians, because the world's economy, we see it. If it goes one way, we're fighting in Taiwan. If it goes another way, we have peaceful relationships, and we're actually building chips and getting medications from all the world. We cannot we can ill trust that though. We have to do more manufacturing in the United States. We have to do that manufacturing largely in Florida because we have an education system that bars none until you stop our education. Because when you now have limitations that say a woman's rights and women's health can actually be determined in 5 weeks, you cannot get an abortion in 5 weeks. 5 weeks. Now, I've been married for a long time. My wife told you 35 years. I've probably been married a little bit longer than her. But that being the case, 5 weeks, how in the world do you know, unless you're testing every month, that you were pregnant in 5 weeks? That is not legitimate. I won't call it asinine or anything else. But I can tell you, when she goes into the doctor's office, I sit in the lobby. If I'm invited in, I will go in. But what happens in that doctor's office is between her and her doctor. And so we're not talking about individual things like abortion. We're talking about her entire health care. Now, if we can't train to the full throat of health care, then we can't keep those people coming to our colleges and universities. I know I have 5 medical doctors on staff. My chief medical officer is an OBGYN oncologist. She is Dr. Cynthia Macri, but she's also formerly Captain Cynthia Macri from the United States Navy. So when we talk about, persistent monitoring and all that, we've worked that for 8 years. But when we talk about women's health, that becomes very, very critical. Because when we lose those rights, at the same time, we're losing the rights to books in schools. And at the same time, we cannot teach the full throat of our history and how we relate to each other. It is so difficult to yell at the TV. It really is. And I yelled for a year, and I yelled for 2 years, and now at the 4-year point, I don't see a person that can beat Rick Scott, short of me. And not only can I beat him, I'm going to beat him. Because when we talk about health care, I'm equally competent. I can talk from one end of healthcare to the other. I can talk about Medicare, Medicaid, Indian Health Services, DOD, VA. I can talk about commercial insurance, and I can not just talk about it. I have technology, the largest healthcare network in the country. And all we do all day, not all we do, but we do mostly all day, is stop $120 million a day in Medicare fraud. If we want to talk about the military, he did 23 months. You see that Navy hat he wears? 23 months. The Navy does not have a 23-month Navy contract. I have no idea how he got out in less than in that much time, but 23 months and deployed once. But he shows up with the Navy hat. Why show up with a Navy hat? I got it in the truck. My Navy hat is 8.5 years, and there's about 9 levels of difference in what we did and how our ranking structure. We basically support his service, but it's not that service that we need in the United States Senate today. When we talk about macroeconomics, I don't even think we'll have that discussion. Because the questioning and how our economics works is not just drop taxes. We all want lower taxes, but we also don't want potholes. But there is the balance. And the things that I do, if you guys have read me, You know, I look more like a Republican on paper than I look like a Democrat. Never voted for a Republican once. Reagan almost got me on his first time. I was in the military, but he didn't. But I can tell you that if we want a solid and stable government, we have to be able to pay for it. We don't have to overpay for it. Well, there are many things that we don't have to have, but I can assure you that when we look at how we're going to balance the government, balance our budget, there are things that we can do that actually don't get us to a point of not being able to have our potholes done. Because all politics is local. So with that, I can tell you that I'm running for the United States Senate. I'm from Florida. I've lived in 8 parts of Florida. 8. From Tallahassee as a college student to Pensacola as a naval flight pilot, to Tampa because I flew special forces asset, and I'm from Miami. But I can tell you, I know this state. I know its value. This state made me. It made me. It got me to the point of being from one of the poorest environments in the state of Florida to being the only person, I don't have to call courses, but being the only person of color to ever own 3 golf courses. To have a system that we have that messages into every point of sale pharmacy in the United States and 5 of the incorporated territories. And to be able to live a life that could get me on any board of any college in the state. I choose to be on the board of Indian River State College and not Florida A&M, not the University of Florida or Florida State. Because as a 2.8 grade point average student, I, graduating now, could not get into Florida A&M or Florida State or the University of Florida or the University of Miami if you want to add them in. I would have to go to a junior college, get a 2-year degree, do well in that environment, and then populate up. So that's where I sit. And on the board, over the last 2 years, and for the next 2 years, we have not had a graduate. We have a thing called a Promise Program, where we take the state monies and we take donated monies, and we do not charge that each student graduating with a 2-year degree has 0 debt. Now the president's doing a great job to try to get loans, student loans, but they have 0 debt because we pay as we go. And we're one of the only state schools that actually has increased its population, as opposed to decreasing the rate of increase. So these are the kinds of things that there are solutions. We are good people. Florida is not all red. And I will win this election. So thank you all for having me. I'm so proud and glad to be here. We're going to do this job like he showed us.
If you have questions, please go to the microphones on the side. There's a hand raised. Eric?
I'm looking for that macroeconomics guy. Come on. Go ahead.
We'll use those to certify some Trump victory.
So I can tell you, I have full faith. I have full faith in the electoral system in the United States. If President Trump or the former President Trump wins the election, I I'm a military guy. We stand at attention. We salute our person. But I can tell you, when it's time for him to go, I'm going to be there as well. You had a follow-up?
I was just wondering if that was a yes or a no.
Oh, that's a yes. Yeah, believe me, I have full faith and credit in the trust in our electoral system and how the votes are counted. So that answer would be yes. I would support. If he wins, he wins.
I'm one of the macroeconomic guys. Yeah, there's a person that worked for Bernie Sanders in the Senate as economic advisor to the Democrats, whose name was Stephanie Kelton. And a few years back, she wrote a book titled The Deficit Myth, and it basically outlines what modern monetary theory is and why it's significant, because it basically, the theory documents the way the federal government works from a funding perspective, but on top of that, it really gets into why deficits are really totally misunderstood, and it comes down to the fact that most politicians, when they talk about federal funding, are using a kitchen table analogy for it. And the federal government is not a kitchen table. It is the provider of the currency. It is not a user of the currency, and most people don't understand that.
So thank you for the statement, and I'll turn it into a question. So let's give an idea. The book that he's referencing, I have not read the totality of the book, but I definitely understand the concept. The concept says that we will always have deficits. Now, you can have uncontrollable deficits or you can have controllable deficits. And the reference is, you saw what happened in COVID. We had, from the Trump administration, we had to do investments in both medications and in people staying at home. And then that was taken over by the current administration as well. And so though our deficits rose because they were controlled and because they were focused, meaning we have an infrastructure bill and the like, then we did not go so far out like many other countries did in our interest rates, even though it went higher. So when we now talk about the soft landing and we talk about our deficits, we see ourselves coming into a very soft landing, much softer than any of us thought, because the controllability is there, and what we did not do is run to do tax relief to the richest people in the country, if not the richest people in the world. That's why we actually have this, what we are calling the soft landing, and that's why we have an economy that is rated the richest in the world. I understand that. I have a patent called FRIAR. Look it up. I can't even remember what FRIAR stands for, but I can tell you, it basically takes the world's economy and it looks at things like the FTSE and the like, and it actually measures and monitors and it sets those guidelines. And you know, some people use it, some people don't. We don't charge for it, but I can tell you, there's 3 people in the Senate, all in the Senate, none in the House, that actually understand even the implications of the book, if not the implications of our macroeconomy. I just happened to got forced into it by my wife and my son. So thank you.
I think this microphone has the Rick Scott syndrome. It's going down. Anyway, my question and statement is regarding your bio. I admire your vested interest in Social Security, and to that, I'm interested in your platform as how you would address the Social Security issue that by 2033 the reserves may be exhausted and people may lose about 23% of their benefits. I'd like to hear what your how you would handle that short term and long term.
Sure, great question. So Rick Scott's movement to have Social Security rebid every 5 years was termed draconian by his own side, by the chairman of his own side, meaning that it is a very underfunded system. So we have two problems. We have the implication that it will be out of money in that time frame, and we have the lack of increase in our Social Security benefits that don't match the interest rates or the movement of our economy. So now people are getting poor and we're running out of funds. So when we look at what happens with that, we first have to make sure that it's guaranteed. That means that we have to put more money into that infrastructural system. And so where do you get that money without raising taxes? There are a number of things that we've done in our economy. We saw the president put a $800 billion plus up. If we did something like that, we'd get about 8 to 10 more years on the program. But the other parts of that is we've got to be able to do things with our economy. Because if we can't get below 3.5% in our economic structure that actually move toward 10%, we will not be able to maintain the programs that we know and maintain them in a way we know them. But we've got to look at Social Security almost as if it's an adult tax. And we have to be able to put more money into the Social Security system. That is very different than Medicare and Medicaid because they're funded very differently. But I can tell you, we have and should expect to have more people retiring. They're going to retire on time, and they're going to retire in a way that they are not able to cover themselves because we have so many changes and transitions associated with AI that we're going to have to be able to fund that way. So I don't think that we have an immediate raise in taxes. I also don't think that we will have to raise taxes if we look at across the board. But I definitely know that we have to do something. And so when you look at what Rick Scott is saying is we will bid to how much money we have. Well, we can't, as the richest country in the world, we cannot do that because there's too many people that will be left outside. So that's I would call that a pivot answer, but I can assure you that the people who will make those decisions have to be realistic about what Social Security is, how much money people get, how does that money equate to what their ability and affordability of what they're buying, and then we'll be able to work our way back to a balance on Social Security that should actually add about 10 years. Thank you. That's a great question, though.
I just want to make a statement. I live right off 441 by Spanish Spring and 42. There's a big intersection there. And I saw a very horrible thing. It was a Trump stand selling banners or whatever they're doing. And there was a sign that said Trump Nation. No, the nation doesn't belong to one person. It belongs to everyone. There's no Trump Nation. And the sign up there before your sign, it says Trump wants to be president for life. And it scares me that he can be so strong with other people that he can maybe change the law and say, I'll be president for 8 years. And he is very scary. He scares me bad.
Well, I can thank you for the statement. I can tell you that we saw what our military did when they tried to, we'll call it steal the election. They put improper people in place, and I would threaten to say illegal people in place, with illegal means, methods, and modalities to try to stay in office. We now know what that playbook looks like. If we elect Trump, we're doomed to have to challenge it. But I do think, know, and trust that the power of the United States, with our Congress, our Senate, our military, and all the rest that we have and know and trust the truth, will be able to stop him from staying in office. Because we are a republic that is a democracy that is actually built and based on foundations that we have seen worse than Trump. And he will too pass. So thank you for the statement. But I can tell you, if I thought that he would not be able to do it, I might not be running. But when we lost West Virginia because the senator decided not to run, and that will be a Trump person replacing him. And we have Texas at risk, and we have Florida with Rick Scott. I had no choice but to run. Because if we don't maintain the Senate, it makes it astronomically more hard to keep him out of staying in office. And that's, I don't say that in, my public comments and all the rest, but I can tell you, I could not sit back on the sidelines and watch that happen. That's why I'm in this race, and I will beat Rick Scott. I'm going to beat him every way.
How's your campaign funds doing? And where can we contribute to your campaign?
That's not even a planned question. So, our campaign, I'll just give you a little background. We went and we spent the first 3 months listening. You see that L in the red L? It stands for us going out to our first quarter listening. We then, in listening and learning, we then spent the next 3 months now repeating back to people what we heard and where our policies and positions are. Now we're at the point of we're in a heavy race. We've got about 7 people that we've got to run against. We think we're in the lead now, but we also know that politics is local and there's some folks that might team together to go after us. The question gets to how can we fund our win? Because it's about messaging. So, StanleyForFlorida.com. That's Stanley, F-O-R, Florida.com. You can go there, you can learn about us as a party, and you can learn about us as a candidate, and you can learn about us locally, but you can also donate. The maximum donations are $3,300 for this term, and then you can do another $3,300, and you can put it all in now because we're going to win the primary. But that being the case, it is very important that you reach in, reach deep, and whether you're putting money to us or somebody else in the Democratic Party, these candidates, as well as I, we really need your help because we're going to turn Florida blue. We're way more purple than we are red. StanleyForFlorida.com.
Hi, my name is Dorothy. I'm so glad to meet you, and I appreciate your message to us today. I have a relative that's a doctor with the VA clinic here in the Villages. They are overrun with people, veterans who need help. They only have 16 doctors. We are the largest veterans organization in the state. The problems there are manifold, but there is no more room for expansion. I know that you're a veteran, so you care. I want someone that will pay attention to the needs of the veterans, not only here in the villages in Florida, but in the United States. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. So for me, I also worked another bill called the Support Act. So the Support Act was designed to deal with parts of the problems. So just a little something on VA in Florida. In this region, let's say between here and Orlando, we have the best VA hospitals in the world. Because VA is actually a worldwide organization. We have VA facilities in Europe and the like. But if you can't get in, if there's too many veterans, we have 1.6 million veterans in the state of Florida. And I'm going to get their endorsement too. But the other part of that is we have 141,000 of them are active duty military. So they get to go on the military hospital. They get to see a doctor today or tomorrow. The veterans that we have who don't have that luxury, they got 60-day, 90-day waiting list, and that's the ones who live around here, where she's describing. Think about them who live in Central Florida, where they gotta now drive 60 to 80 miles to get over here, only to be able to get an appointment 60 days later. We have got to be able, and this is an easy fix that doesn't cost us any money. All we have to do is to say, if you cannot get an appointment in 2 weeks, then you get to go to a commercial civilian doctor. All we're doing is moving the backlog. It's not going to cost us any difference because you're going to see that. And so let me just give you one little bit of my history. My oldest brother, who has passed away now, he died from COVID. He spent the time from Vietnam. He was an Air Force guy. He took a second tour of Vietnam to keep my second oldest brother, who was Army infantry, from going to Vietnam. But they had really short shelf life. So in that second tour, he got exposed to Agent Orange because the Air Force was dropping Agent Orange. He got out at 14 years with only 1/4 lung capacity, and he sat waiting for 20 years before he got a double lung transplant. 20 years. And he would not have gotten it then, but for the fact that you heard about what was happening in Arizona, and within 2 weeks of the Arizona reporting, he was under the knife, and he lived his best life after his transplant. And but for the fact that he caught COVID just before the next vaccine, he would still be here today. So, working veterans health is really serious to me because my second oldest brother is also dead. Neither one of them should be gone, but for the fact that what they did in the military positioned them. And I guarantee you, if they were here, that they would not change one thing in their military life, nor I in mine. So I love that question, because if we could now move, if you were not able to see this veteran in 2 weeks, then they can go to any hospital that would pay and take a Medicare patient. We would solve that problem, and it would not add $1. Would not add $1 because the system is already in place. It just has a longer period. All we have to do now is just change the dates. And that solves the problem. Now, the issue is, how do they pay? Well, all that mechanism is already in place. All we have to do is have the resolve to actually do it. And so that's my answer to that, and believe me, that's one of the very first things. In the state of Florida, we used to have nationally 214 veterans used to be homeless every night. We have done with the Support Act and a couple of others, that's down to 38,000. But of that 38,000 who go to sleep homeless, most of them come to Florida because we have the right climate. So we have a lot to do with VA, with Veterans Health, and I'm very well prepared for that. Thank you.
We're running a bit long, so we'll take your two questions, and then we'll move on to the rest of the meeting. And of course, we got the 50-50 drawing, so hang on for that.
Okay, thank you very much, Stanley, for that very informative presentation. As most people around here already know, we are in a green economy. The country is operating in a green economy. Publix has just advertised 49% increase in profits and so on and so on. As a U.S. Senator, what will you do to counter or to eliminate that as quickly as possible? Because the 50% of the country cannot afford to continue on. They don't recognize that we are in a very prosperous economy. What's your answer to this in 2 words or less?
First of all, I am one of those big corporate greedy guys, so I can tell you that the things that I've learned in business are very simple. It's like a 12-inch rule. If you can be humble and you can actually care, you're going to be able to take care of your people. So what we have, just to give the description, we have the highest rates of leadership funds in the history of the world. And we have those same people funding the challenge for the increase in minimum wage. If we look in Florida, we have a system where we refuse $2 billion to build high-speed rail from Miami to Jacksonville and from Tampa to Orlando, because we say, let the commercial folks build it. There's no country in the world, including this one, that would have done that. That's what Rick Scott did. And then he invested in the rail system. So what winds up happening is, when we look at housing as an example, West Palm Beach, 49,000 available rooms, 49,000 homeless. Now, how can you afford, as a homeless person, any one of those 49,000? So we basically have a housing shortage. If you can't afford to live there and you have to live someplace else to work there, it now just costs you more money to work there. So the gap gets wider. So we have to do a couple of things. One, I don't think the government should move into corporations and say you have a limitation on your earning power, but I definitely think that there are systems that we should put in place to cover things like minimum wage. I think that had we built that system, just the rail system, just use one example, 11,000 jobs on just building it. If you go and you look at the rail system as it goes from Orlando to Miami, every single stop has gross development there because you've got a transportation system. Our highways are great, but just think about being able to live in Tampa and work in Orlando and taking a train commuting back. And then with the next generation of funding, come back on the western side. I am all for getting that money back here because the money that they refused to take went to Utah. They had a nice train system and they're about to go to Vegas and then to California.
I know.
It is absolutely crazy to not invest in the rail system, to expand our rail system because it helps in everything. Emergency movement. Look at how many trucks are on our highways that could actually be moved onto the rail system. So I love the question, but I can tell you we're on pace to not have places for people to live who work at the lower part of our economy because you just can't afford it. It is a dire system. For me, I expect that I will be able to bring high-tech jobs. I have two company structures. One company structure that people make over $100,000 a year, and a different one that people make between $18 and $25 a year, a week, or an hour, yes, an hour. But when I see the two of them, I see a dichotomy that actually has implications that this is only going to get worse. It's going to get worse without transportation network, and it's going to get worse with AI. And we've got to be able to move fast because AI is not going to take from 1914 to 2024. It's going to be 5 years. That's the implication. And until we start looking at these problems as being much more greatly compressed, we can't get to an answer. And that the whole yelling and screaming, my job to go to Congress is really to quiet down the noise, identify problems, and solve those problems. And that's a big one. That is a big one. So thank you for the question.
My name is Tabrisha. I'm not as wise or as seasoned as the audience, but I did qualify for AARP this year.
Yeah. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you. Healthcare isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. I work at the Village Regional Hospital. You have health shans now. And a lot of stories I hear is employees, they can't retire or stop working because they can't afford health care either for the spouse or the rest of the family. So do you foresee health care decreasing, part one? And part two, will there ever be a max on what pharmacies can charge for drugs?
Oh, great question for my wife. Let's get the administration to answer half that question. So let me take the last part first, because I work extensively at every pharmacy, and all of them are my clients. So what the president has done is a very good job of, and I would call it a very good first step in reduction of the rate of cost on a certain few medications. But what we've never done in this country is put an evaluated criteria on what our investments in those companies. So we saw it very clearly in very short time frame with COVID. We were able to identify a disease, identify the vaccine, and then the government then came in with its buying power to just buy it for everybody. So what that did, though, is it gave us the model for which the drug pricing structure that the president implicated went into place. But we didn't need that altogether. We could have just looked at what Canada is doing and buying the exact same drugs at 10% of the cost that we're paying. Going back to the earlier question, I am still that business guy, so I like the fact that we should be able to buy on a competitive market. And this is not new to us. They like to make you think that it's new. But the Veterans Administration buys on a negotiated pricing basis every day. So why can't CMS, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, buy under the same structure or whatever else? So what they forced the president to do is basically put, like for diabetes, you got a cap. You can no longer charge $400 or $300 on something that only costs you $25 to make or $15 to make. But we need to do more of that. So on the second part, the broader healthcare issue, I am not a Bernie Sanders that says Medicaid or Medicare for all. The reason I'm not because I don't believe in it, is because I know we don't have the luxury of having people who are sensible enough to take us out of the doldrums of being the only of the top 10 countries in the world who don't have national health care. But what we can do is we can actually make absolutely sure that everybody has some health care. Be it the Affordable Care Act, Medicare, Medicaid, we have Indian Health Services, which should almost be gone away because the Medicare, the Affordable Care Act is a better insurance plan and cheaper than the Indian Health Services. We have DOD, which has its own separate implications, and we have VA. VA, believe it or not, is the nation's hospital. Meaning when COVID hit, that should have been the place that we all had response to go to. So as we look at how we're going to lower the cost of healthcare, I can assure you, probably in my entire term, the only thing that I can address is the reduction of the rate of increase in healthcare, because it's going to increase. But we also have a situation where we have, in 24 months, we'll have almost 40% more drugs that actually are positioned to come into play that will help us. We could very well, in our lifetimes, see cures in cancer, in like 5 different types of cancer, in our lifetime. And so what we've got to be able to do is to afford the use of those medications. We are 48,000 medical doctors short in the United States. She's trying to put 48 medical schools together and fund them. But most of them at historically black colleges and universities, because what we saw with COVID is people of color were disproportionately affected. So we have to put those services where they're most needed and where they're most trusted. So those are the kinds of things that I'm telling you, every person that stands here, ask that question. Because when they now come back with the soundbite answer is, I'm going to fund this, what does that really mean? How are we going to do it? For healthcare, be real clear, the prices won't go down, not until one of these AI machines that you can just step in and they diagnose you for everything. But what we can do, and we can do it implicated with the advancing in technology, persistent monitoring and new medications, we can reduce significantly the rate of increase. And that rate of increase is the thing that will cripple us in the Medicare or Medicaid system if we don't do it. So thank you for the question, but I can assure you that there's not going to be anybody that gets on the stage that is going to be able to address that problem in the way that I can, because, like I said, when I message into every point of sale pharmacy, that means a doctor writes a prescription. We then do about 3.5 billion calculations in 50 milliseconds just to say yes or no. That's the same thing that we use for diabetes, congestive heart failure, COPD, patient falls, and another 3 diseases, which when you add up what we spend in those disease categories, it equates to about 80% of the US population spend on healthcare. The technology is coming, we have to be able to implicate it into our systems, and you have to be able to understand. So if you're getting nothing else from everything that I said, persistent monitoring. Because at our age, we then become subject to patient falls and other things, get them to write a prescription for your device and then use those devices, because food is the first medicine and we are the first doctor. So thank you all for having us.
All right, so we're saying thank you to Stanley. And before the drawing, I want to say you're welcome to move to the villages and fix their golf courses. We also want you to be able to say, like other speakers,
Oh boy.
Now you can say, I went to the villages and all I got was this lousy t-shirt.
All right. Can I get this one? All right. Okay. 2, 8, 8, 7, 0, 4. Hey! All right. 288. 826. 288. 826. Got it? All right. We gotta get over to the eye doctor.
My glasses?
All right. 288 840. All right. Well, thank you all. Thanks for having us. Definitely thank Dennis, because he's been a great host. So thank you all.
Okay, next slide. And the next one. All right, so you came in and there were two pieces of paper on your chair. One was a clean water petition, which were brought in by Sue Dublin, the president of the Women's Club of the Villages, Democratic Club of the Villages, and her husband Joe. You might have signed one of these last year. The organizers were trying to get it on the ballot for 24. They ran out of time. So they refiled it to requalify for 2026. So even if you signed one last year, you can sign another one this year. That's the one that will count. If you've never signed one, take it with you if you don't want to file it today, or bring it up to the front to Joe and Sue at the end of the meeting. And we'll get those sent in to help qualify them for the ballot. Next slide, please. Now, the other piece of paper was a ballot. By Florida Democratic Party bylaws, clubs must have secret ballot elections. I know you're thinking, we don't need those stinking secret ballots, but we're going to do it anyway, just to follow the rules. We've done it before. All I have to do is check yes or no. This is a slate of candidates, and here they are. Next slide, please. Georgia Schonauer, our secretary, is moving to membership director, if you say that's okay. It's an important job. Georgia. Next slide, please. Mary Pierce. I had to look to make sure I spelled secretary right. A lot of typos in my stuff. Heard that Georgia wanted to move over. She stepped and volunteered to take over as secretary. Mary. Thank you. And at the front table with Andy Kleinman, our tech director, who's leaving us, who is Susan Jones, who he says will be even better than he is. So, Susan, thank you for agreeing. So y'all can mark your ballots. And where'd the bag go? I had the election bag on the table there. Oh, she's out there collecting the ballots. Good for her. The bag lady is over there. So she'll take your ballots. All right, and next slide, please. We want to bid a fond farewell to Andy, who's done not only the tech stuff at the meetings and at the events, and buying equipment, and he's everywhere doing everything, but he's had a wonderful tenure on the board with lots of great ideas and helpful suggestions on how to do things better, more efficiently, and more interestingly. So thank you, Andy. Next slide, please. So we know that a lot of villagers leave for the summer and go somewhere else to get out of the heat and humidity. But families and their children who live locally are still here. And the kids are out of school, so some of the programs that provide them lunches and breakfasts and backpacks to take home for weekend snacks, they aren't there to help. So I just ask you to consider, particularly this time coming up here over the summer, maybe giving a little bit more. We're so thankful for the thousands of pounds over a year of food and supplies that you donate, and thousands of dollars. And when you go to the table, you used to see Norm Davis for a long time. Thank you, Norm. He's in the audience somewhere. No? There he is. And currently our fruit guy is Bill Penix, who's on the right there. So I want to shout out once a meeting to a volunteer who helps make the club go, because it's all volunteer work. So Bill Penix, and today he's not with us, so he doesn't get to hear this praise for what he's doing. All right, next slide, please. All right, so earlier in the meeting, at the beginning, I said politics is not a spectator sport, that there's a lot of hard work to do. The Sumter County Democratic Executive Committee, known as the Democratic Party locally, is running a sponsor a canvasser program. And what that means is, for a lot of people going door to door, especially if they have to go outside their area of comfort, like in Greater Sumter, is not something they really want to sign up to do. We understand that. But what you can do for $18.50 per hour is sponsor a canvasser who the DEC will hire and pay to go out and do canvassing. So it's a program that just started. We're still going out every third Saturday on Days of Action. And so you can sign up for 1 hour, a couple, 3. You can sign up to do a couple hours a month. Whatever you want to do. You can use this QR code. To use the QR code, you just open your phone, focus it on the QR code until it lights up, tap on the address, and it'll take you to the actual news site where you can log your donation and fill out the information. So as the meeting ends, if you haven't cast your ballot, bring it to Diane with the bag. If you want to give your petitions up, signed up, bring it to Joe and Sue Dublin here in the front. If you want to do the QR code, come up to the front of it, makes it easier for you to use your phone. Or if you want help doing it, navigating to the website, Chris Anderson from the DEC is up there at the table. Okay, I know that's a lot, and it's been a long meeting, and I declare the meeting adjourned. Thank you for coming.